Hello everybody, I'm Gabriel Del Santo and this is Pro Indie Dev Live. We are at lecture number 8 and I want to thank you for being here because today we are going to talk about one of the subjects that I like the most, and that is how to apply professional marketing to your game, right? So in this lecture you learn everything that you need to know to make sure that your game sells. So what you should be doing and when you should be doing it, what you should not be doing and that most developers usually do, and why it doesn't give results and sometimes it even hurts their project. So you will be able to see if you are doing some of these mistakes and why you should stop making them and what you should be doing instead, and basically what are the things that you can start doing right now regardless of where you are in your development timeline. If you are conceiving your game, if you are just starting out, which are the things that you should be taking into account? If you are already advanced into your game, which are the things that you should be doing in that particular moment of development? And then at the end, when it's time to promote, when it's time to start getting some eyes to your project, how you do that, right? So which are the things that you should be doing in each different moment, and which are the things that will have a disproportionate effect in your game's visibility and your game's ability to sell, right? And I always like to offer a superpower for those strong developers, the doers, that will stay to the end of this lecture. So if you stay to the end of this lecture, today's superpower is that if you watch to the end, you leave this lecture understanding more about marketing than 95% of independent developers out there. And once you get to the end of this lecture and you learn what there is to be learned here, you will start browsing maybe Steam, maybe the App Store, I don't know, maybe some other marketplace for games, and you start seeing the mistakes that are made. And you can even like open Twitter and see how most developers are trying to promote their games and why that's not a good idea. So you just leave this lecture and have this superpower of seeing how other people are doing marketing and understanding why it doesn't work, and also knowing what you should be doing, right? So this is one of my favorite topics because I actually have an education in marketing. I have learned that in school for 4 to 5 years, and then I have applied this professionally for many years as well, including in the context of the games industry. And I would even say that many developers don't really like marketing. They kind of get scared about the idea of getting their child, that the game that they love so much, and putting it for other people to see, and they fear that they will be judged. They fear that they will be, I don't know, humiliated because the game, whatever reason there is, but there's always this adrenaline of getting yourself out there and start talking about your game. So people just get scared about that and really don't like the marketing part. They would rather have someone else doing the marketing for them, right? Maybe a publisher or someone who understands what they're doing. And what I would say is that even if you want a publisher to eventually adopt your game, let's call it like that for now, if they want someone to get your game and get into their professional workflow for promotion, like a publisher, for example, you need to know this stuff from day one, right? So before you start your project, and if you are already midway into your game, you are already developing, it's fine. There's something that we call a intervention in the methodology that I'm teaching throughout these lectures, and you are supposed to intervene on your game and just make sure that you have the prerequisites embedded into your game, so that when it's time to promote or when it's time to seek a publisher, you have something that's really strong and that will really have the highest possible probability in your case to draw attention and to draw sales. All right, so this is a big subject. I'll be moving to my screen, to my second screen as always, and today's lecture will be structured in 3 parts. So I write them down here, and I'll start filling this as we go. So part number 1 is how actually, let me see if I can copy this to be a little bit faster. So how most independent developers approach marketing and why it doesn't work, right? So this is part number 1. Part number 2 is a professional understanding of game marketing and how you can apply it in your case. And finally, more practically, what you should be doing, right? So number 1 is what are most indie developers doing, why it doesn't work, and what are the mistakes in there. Number two is more of a broader understanding of marketing. And of course, I went to school and was like 4 or 5 years studying this and then applying for many years. And I don't have the intention of making this like a 1 hour or 2 hours tutorial that will teach everything that I learned in 4 or 5 years. Of course, I'll be filtering what is relevant for game developers, and more specifically, independent game developers, right? So that's you, like one person developing a game, or maybe just starting out, or maybe just a small team, even if you are midway into your project. But what is important for us game developer, right? So I'll be filtering that and give you some of the theory, some of the foundation that you need to understand, and then more practically the step-by-step part of it, right? So okay, depending on where you are, what you should be doing. So we are about to get started. I'll just copy this here so that we can keep following this structure. So let's make this a little bit prettier, all right? Because beauty is important in lectures, as I found out. Okay, let me see actually if I'm sharing correctly. It seems to be working all right. Okay, and by the way, for many people here, maybe it's the first time that you are watching a Pro Indie Dev live lecture. So if that's your case, thank you very much for the trust. Welcome to our little initiative. I'm really happy to have the opportunity to help you. And if you haven't yet, I just want to recommend that you go to proindiedev.com/guide. And the reason for that is because this is actually also a small tutorial on how you can take advantage of this initiative. So you'll be landing on this page right here, which is called a landing page. By the way, there's one free digital marketing bit for you right now. A page where someone lands, the first page that they get into a website is called the landing page. So you'll be getting into this landing page. There's an explanation on how Pro Indie Dev works, how Pro Indie Dev Live works, and how you can take benefit of it, right? So it's basically one lecture every Sunday. These lectures, they will usually stay available for only a week. So next Sunday, I'll be removing this one and adding a new one. In the very beginning of this initiative, I'm leaving some of them available for a longer time. So if you're watching this as I'm recording or broadcasting, make sure to take advantage of that by going there into the archive and watching the past lectures, all right? Then there is one-on-one Q&A, which basically means that you can ask me if you have any doubts in your game development, regarding how to be successful, how to organize your work, how to promote your game, how to phrase what your game is about, all this nice stuff that I'll be teaching here today or in the other lectures. You can just come to Instagram and ask me. So just click on this big button that's here in proindiedev.com/guide. If you don't have an Instagram account, it's fine. Many people don't. I actually didn't until not so long ago. So you can just come here and you can send me a direct message by clicking on this thing over here. So come here, make sure to follow, and then, basically you have the opportunity to talk to me. And here, finally, are the starter track lectures where you get like this recommended watching order if you never thought about professional game development before, or maybe if you have some sort of problem that you are getting consistently, maybe there's something in the basics part that you're doing wrong, and that's having a disproportionate effect in you not being able to finish games, you not being able to get attention to your game, or getting sales, or even getting started, right? So many of the foundations are here. And finally, the most important part is you making sure that you are enabling email notification to these lectures by signing up here, and this will just make sure that you get one email every week with the link to that week's lecture, all right? So with that out of the way, welcome once again to the new people. I'm really glad to have you here. And we'll start talking about how most independent developers approach marketing and why it doesn't work, right? And it's basically, there are what I like to call two different categories of marketing that tend to not work and that are very, very common approaches for game developers. One is, of course, dream marketing, right? So what is dream marketing? Dream marketing is you basically working on your game, believing that if you make your game really good, if you develop with your heart, and if you're artistically honest, in the end, that's a really good game, and a good game will sell itself, right? So let me even write this down. A good game sells itself. And of course, that's wrong. That's actually not the case. It was never the case, maybe in 2008, when, Indie Game the movie and the games that are shown in Indie Game the movie, when they were launched, that was already not the case. But even as stuff started getting more competitive, more people started making really good games and putting their on Steam or on consoles, which is way more accessible nowadays. When they started putting their games to sell over there, you never heard about the games that were not successful, right? There is a mindset, there are things that you need to be doing to make sure that success happens to you, right? So a good game does not sell itself. It's really, really important to understand that. So let me show one of the main concepts that I learned. Actually, no, I just mentioned Indie Game the movie, so let me roll with that. One of the games that was really famous and started, this whole movement about indie games was a game called World of Goo. It was a incredibly successful indie game that you have probably seen before. So if you haven't, let me just show it to you, because I know there are some new people here, right? So this is a hugely successful game. Actually, for some reason, I don't know if that's because I'm streaming, but for some reason it seems to be frozen. Okay, not super important, right? So World of Goo, which you can see here, is one of these games that launched very early, like maybe in 2008. So we can see here, it launched in 2008, and it was so incredibly successful, right? And I happen to be friends with one of the two creators of this game. It's a really cool guy called Ron Carmel. And Ron, which is one of the creators, he talks a lot about, back in 2018 or 2017, actually, I started organizing Pro Indie Dev. And I approached Ron and say, hey, do you want to, basically give a talk at Pro Indie Dev conference, which was something I organized back then. And one of the things that we discussed the most was what we call survivorship bias, right? Survivorship bias is something that makes people really, estimate not really well what they should be doing by copying the wrong traits of games that are successful, right? So if you know what this image represents, then probably you are a little bit ahead of the pack already. But if you've never seen this picture before, I will explain what it means to you. Survivorship bias. So the short version of the story is this: during World War II, the U.S. military would they would have like these planes fighting, and when they would get back, somehow get back to the base after fighting with other planes from the enemy, they would see that there were holes in that plane, in several parts of that plane, right? So this is basically a chart showing where the holes tended to be, right? And what was the thought that they had? Okay, so if we are getting shooted, if our pilots are getting attacked in these particular parts of the plane, then the best that we can do to protect them is to add more armor in the parts that have the most bullet holes, right? So these were the most common areas, like the tips of the wing, this part around the pilots, that's the part that they had more damage, and so they started reinforcing the armor over there. And then one teacher, I can't remember the university, they said actually it's the other way around. What you should be doing is reinforcing the armor of the other parts. And they were like, but why would I do that? Because I see that every plane that gets back to the base, they are always damaged in those particular parts. And the reason was that all the planes that were being damaged everywhere else, they were not even getting back to base, right? So they were only analyzing the planes that actually survived the battle. So what that indicated was that when you were damaging the other parts of the plane, the ones that are white, was when it was really, really little, right? So those planes, they never got back to base. And so, this was survivorship bias at work. People misjudging by only seeing the successful planes, the ones that successfully got back, and judging the patterns based only on them and not on the whole spectrum, the whole, basically the whole set, right? Also considering the ones that were not so lucky as to get back alive, right? So this is one thing that you need to understand. Survivorship bias, right? So whenever you are looking at some very successful game out there, you might think that that game was really, really successful because it was really good. One aspect of it is because you are only seeing the other side of the marketing, the customer side of the marketing, but also that game could be successful despite not being really good at performing their marketing, or usually even they did some really important things well during the development. Uh, Either the developer knows of that or not, they did something really well throughout the development process, and I want you to start being conscious about that. Or maybe the game was successful despite not doing marketing really, really well, right? So you need to understand that when you're thinking from the top of your head about games that are similar to the one that you're doing, it's not just because the game that you are thinking was successful that if you make a good game that's more or less like that, it will also be successful, because you don't have visibility of all the games that actually try to do the exact same thing and were not successful, because those planes never got back to base, right? So you need to start thinking of this differently. Look at the success cases and also the failure cases, right? And I'll give you a practical example of this in a second. And I start to getting excited about this topic because I really like it. And then I start talking really, really fast. So I apologize for that. So here is Steam. And many people don't know that, but actually if you click right, let me actually make this window come here so that you can see it. Where is the limit? Right here, right? So many people don't know that, but you can actually not type anything in the search and just click here. And that leads you into this page where you can search by search games by tag, right? So that's already one practical tip to help you with your marketing research right here. You can come here, then you will start narrowing by tag. So just indies, for example, roll down here and come to just games. And for the sake of our example, let's start narrowing down by some genre indicating tags, all right? So maybe let's think, for example, only pixel art. So I'll start typing pixel and it says pixel graphics. So now it's not showing all the, I don't know how many games there are on Steam nowadays. It's showing only the ones that are pixel art. Maybe platformer. Maybe that are difficult, for example, right? So now we are seeing a whole list of 400 games that are basically indie games that have pixel graphics, that are platformers, that are considered difficult, all right? And then we start thinking, okay, I'm good because, I'm making a platformer that's pixel graphics and all that. And here's Dead Cells, right? And it's, I can see right here, I don't think I can put my mouse over it, but you can see that it has 52,000 reviews. So let me teach you another neat trick that many people don't know about. But one way to estimate how many units a game has sold, if it was after 2014, released after 2014, is basically getting this number and multiplying it by about 50 nowadays, right? So 52,000 copies times 50. No, Dead Cells has sold about approximately 2,600,000 units, right? So at a price point of, I don't know, let's estimate it's sold usually by $15, it grossed almost $40 million on Steam, right? So you can see something like that, some numbers like that, and think, okay, so I'm really good, right? Because I'm making some game that's kind of like that. Or maybe another reference that I have is Celeste, and it has also sold really well, or Katana Zero, or Blasphemous. This actually makes me really proud to see this in fourth place, because Blasphemous was developed by by a Spanish developer that happens to be one of my oldest customers, or one of my oldest students. Before he released this game, so little side story. Before he released this game, he got into my advanced training, where among many other things I teach marketing, and he knew that he had something really successful in his hands, but he didn't really know why that game was so successful on the Kickstarter phase. So he wanted to make sure that when he released the game, it would also be successful. He got into my advanced training, and I'm super proud of this, of Mauricio, because the game is absolutely fantastic, and it has sold so well, and it's such a good representation of marketing that's well done, right? But what I wanted to say, getting back to our point here, what I wanted to say is that you can see all of these games right here, and all of them are super successful. And this is survivorship bias, all right? What you should be doing instead is actually scrolling down as much as you can, and it start loading more content. And you should also take into account the worst performing games. So some of these, they are actually not released yet. So this one was released in February 2020, and you can see that it has 8 user reviews, right? And if you do the math once again, you can see here that it hasn't sold super well, right? So 8 user reviews times 50, it has sold about 400 copies. And if the developer sold it for, so I think this is, yeah, so maybe let's estimate it's about $5. This developer made about $2,000. It's just a rough approximation. You shouldn't stick to this number like blindly, because there are several things that can affect this math, and I will teach this in one future lecture, but that's not the topic today. But overall, you can see that this was not a super successful game so far. Maybe because it's early access, at some point it will recover, right? But look at all the other games that are platformers, that are pixel art, and that have very, very low review numbers, and so very low sales as well, right? All the games that were already launched. And what you should be doing is understanding the broader range of games that you are kind of competing against, okay, and see where your game will fit, right? So for every successful game that we can see at the top here, that has in the background where you are not seeing that they have all this well done marketing work, there are games that kind of look similar, but for whatever reason they didn't perform nearly that well, right? So this is something that you should start knowing about. So this is dream marketing. Let me see on my notes here if I have something more to talk about this. So survivorship bias is something that you should be paying attention to. And also, I don't like to only say the bad stuff. So let me tell you part of the good stuff here. You realize that once you master the fundamentals, once you start understanding the patterns of these things, it's not super difficult to understand why some games failed, right? And my intention here with this lecture is that you leave it already knowing part of it. So if you started getting paying attention to other things, to other tabs, come back here. This is important stuff. This hour that you are investing here today has a disproportionate effect in your career as a game developer. All right, you need to, if I could go back in time and teach me this stuff, my life would have been completely different. All right, so pay attention. It's important stuff. It's free. So just look at the screen and make sure you're focusing. All right. So what is the other type of marketing that really doesn't work? And this is very, very common. It's anxiety marketing. And what the hell does that mean? This basically means you kind of feeling afraid that your game will not sell when it's time to sell, and so just start sharing stuff about your game to see if it sticks, to see if people will like it, right? So which are some examples of these things? It's stuff like, maybe, for example, and I'm not saying they are necessarily wrong, but I'll be discussing them, right? So maybe you are keeping devlog, like you have a blog and you're talking about your game's development. I have done that, really didn't work. Maybe you are tweeting a lot about it. So let me standardize like this. Maybe you're tweeting. Maybe you are trying to have someone famous, retweeting your game. You are hoping that if one of the big guys notice you and they start retweeting your stuff, you'll be adopted into the little success club, and then your game will automatically, get popular. That's a very common way of seeing marketing when you don't really have a background. So I thought like that in the beginning, even knowing marketing, right? So it's okay if that's you. it's okay, right? There are ways to get out of this. Maybe sending a press release too soon. Your game is not ready to be reviewed yet, and you're trying to get journalists and streamers to play your game, but it's not worth playing yet. And you're doing this because you are anxious. You are afraid that you will get to the end of the development process and nobody will care. And this concern is valid, right? You should be thinking about those things. But the effort that you should be doing to prevent that right now, depending on where you are in your development timeline, is not really this, right? Or maybe finding a publisher to figure this out for them. They're trying to find a publisher that will do all the marketing so that they can focus on what they do better, which is making games, making awesome games. And they see it like that. And the problem with this is that, if you're not doing some of these fundamentals right, no publisher will probably want to work with you and your game, because they can't see themselves selling that game. They want to make a profit, right? So you need to be figuring out this stuff and embedding those traits into your game since conception. Ideally, if you're just starting out, you don't have a plan to sell your current game, you should still know this and have these types of concerns at the back of your mind all the time, because you start learning how to embed those positive, desirable traits into your game, even in your first tests, right? Just being aware of how this works, not only as something that exists in your computer, but actually as an actual product that people are supposed to buy, right? So this tends to be a reflex of anxiety marketing, right? And the problem here is not doing those things. Doing those things by itself will not necessarily hurt your game. What will hurt your game is you spending time that you could be spending on the things that actually matter, or spending time on actually finishing your game, developing your game, because developing a game is already kind of difficult, right? And if you have already got started, you know that. There's problems with bugs, with you not predicting well how long it will take to finish, with you missing deadlines, with some design stuff not working out the way you thought. So it's already kind of difficult, and you should be putting every hour you can into actually getting smartly approaching your next milestone. You should always be concerned about that. One of the main currencies that we as individuals or small teams have to manage when developing games is time. Time is super, super important. And time that you are wasting on some marketing activity that's not working is time that you need to pay for when your game starts selling, right? And what tends to happen here is that, people, they start doing one of these things, they have their heart in the right place when they're trying to do that, but it doesn't have any results, right? So they are tweeting, but nobody retweets. Nobody that's famous adopts their games. Nobody reads the devlog, or people from the press will not respond, or whatever it is. And if you do the math, how many new followers are you getting per hour or per day that you are investing in this, right? People hope that you have some sort of exponential growth at some point, and that doesn't happen, but it's very convenient. That's kind of hope marketing or anxiety marketing, because you're hoping that there will be like this huge rise in the number of followers at some point, right? But it's not right now. So you cannot judge your performance from your past results, and so keep doing it, and you start, as that huge rise doesn't happen, you start getting more anxious, and so you start questioning if the game is good or not. Bad stuff. You don't want to be there, right? So if you are doing one of these things and you like doing that for other reasons, it's fine. Just keep doing it. You can also build a Discord community. It's super cool. Just to not be alone, right? Just to have some sort of feedback. That's very productive. I'm just saying, as a marketing activity, in order to get more followers, it's not that it will not work. It's just that probably the amount of new followers or new users or new actual buyers, people that will actually buy your game, it just doesn't add up to the time that you have to put to make this happen, unless you already have like a huge following. In that case, you probably don't need to be here, right? So and one thing that's interesting, that most people actually don't like doing any of this, right? So I have some good news for you. The good news is that you probably don't need to be doing this, because it will not help you. and we are about to get started into talking about some of the foundational knowledge on marketing that's applicable specifically for game development that you should know, and then you start seeing what you should be doing instead, right? So with that, we are moving to the second part of our presentation. So let's start developing a professional understanding of how game marketing works and how you can apply it, right? And by the way, I'm guessing that many people that are watching this, either as I'm broadcasting or watching the replay, they are FGGS students. So for FGGS students, this has to do with stuff like anti-magnets, attention magnets, surface design, 5 steps of promotion. You start seeing some of these things right here. So this is basically an updated version of that, right? So everything that you have studied regarding that, this still applies. This is just an updated version of these things, right? So let's get started. Oh, and of course, I'm sorry. So lots of new people here. FGGS. FGGS, you hear me mentioning this, is the name of a framework. It stands for Finishing Good Games That Sell. So that's where the weird name comes from, FGGS. It's a framework that's optimized to help people basically finish games as efficiently as possible, making them as good as possible and getting as many sales as possible, right? So this is a paid training. It's advanced for most people, and it's not available for, 99% of the time. So to give you an idea, as I'm recording this, it's been over 1 year since the last time I received new students. The reason for that is because most of my time is spent in my game studio, so it takes me time to receive new students. So I usually only a few times a month, because people request me, I try to open some new spots. Right now it's not available, right? But it's like this complete training. I'm just saying that because FGGS can stand both for the actual advanced training or for the framework. And the good news is that what I'm teaching here today and throughout all the lectures is basically the FGGS framework, right? And you can watch and learn for free. You just need to be here every Sunday and watching the lectures every week, and you'll be able to learn everything that you need, over time, right? It's just a more complete FGGS. The training is just a more complete and more compact training where you can learn everything very quickly, right? But FGGS students who are here, pay attention, because this is an upgraded version of many of the things, and you'll probably be recognizing, so that when I'm talking about, for example, stuff that you should not be doing, part of it can reflect into anti-magnets, for example, right? So just pay attention to this part. All right, and many people, by the way, probably have already heard this explanation. Many indies, they see marketing as this. So they have their game and they want to sell their game, so they will do something like a very mysterious art called marketing. At some point they'll figure this out, and then they'll make sales to reach an audience, right? So this will convert into sales, and they don't really know what marketing means. And what I want you to do today is to start breaking this down so that you understand the steps, and hopefully naturally see how each part of what you should be doing will be relevant to each part of your development process, right? So let's break this down into what I believe is a much more relevant, much more actionable way of seeing this. It's more like game, surface, which is the surface of your game, which will allow you to make certain marketing material, which will allow you to promote your game, which will generate sales. And even if you're not selling your game, if you just want to have lots of free users, it's a freeware, or maybe it's something that people will pay for in the game, like in-app purchases. If you are in the mobile space, for example, this is about reaching an audience, right? And then eventually converting into sales. For premium games like the ones you're seeing on Steam, most of them, it's basically directly converting your game into sales by understanding these different aspects and optimizing each one of them so that you can have the sales results that you want for your game, right? So let me decide in which order I want to tackle this stuff. Usually I would go, from sales, what promotion means, because that's, if you notice, all of these things, they are really, almost all of them are what we can call promotion. So let's do this in the order that I'm used to. So what promotion is? Promotion is the most simple thing you can imagine. It's basically doing the legwork of getting your message in front of people, right? It's not even inventing the message. It's just getting something that's already done, that you have already developed before, and getting it in front of people, right? So this is promotion. It's basically a verb. It's promoting. It's sending emails. It's tweeting about your game. It's reaching out to the press. Let me make this a little bit more precise here. So, for example, tweeting. This is called influencer marketing, getting someone to, basically promote your message for you. A press release. This can both apply to streamers or to other types of influencers, or maybe famous developers that might have a large fan base and might like your game. This is all basically influencer marketing. And part of what you should be doing is sending a press release. So this is super important, of course. And when it's time to promote, which is later than you think, you will be needing to do those activities, all right? But I think one of the main things that I want to convey here is that if you start promoting without having done a good work here, and even here, you will not have results. So what will happen is that you tweet and nobody will care. You try to reach out to people and they will not respond back to you. You send a press release and your game will not appear in any major news outlet where you are hoping people will discover your game, right? So the problem with not doing the previous stuff is that it just won't work. Promotion won't work, right? So I'll be getting back into this. I just want to complete the cycle here. So what is marketing material? Which are the relevant, marketing material that you should know about, because it will probably be part of your work when you get to that stage to develop this. It's stuff, for example, like your sales page, right? So what is a sales page? Sales page is like, for example, this over here. So this is a sales page. It's made of a trailer. In the case of Steam, it's made of a short description. Most importantly, it's made of a name. This is part of your sales page, is the name of the game, and the thumbnail or the capsule art that will appear when you're seeing this game in the context of maybe recommendations, for example. So usually when you scroll down, more like this is a capsule, right? And there's capsule art, and this is part of your sales page as well, right? So this is a sales page, and this is one of the materials that you need to be preparing for your marketing when the time comes. Another example of that is your press kit. What is a press kit? It's all the information that someone who might want to write an article about your game, like a journalist, they like to ideally have all the information that they need to write that article in one place. So some of the best screenshots, a short description of what the game is, to which platforms it will launch, when it will launch, some of the differentials, some of the unique aspects of the game, any curiosity that you want to add in. If you can put all of that into your press kit, and this is usually a file that a journalist who might be interested about your game, if they get an email, like your press release, for example, something that you send to several members of the press, they will open a link that will have your press kit, and they will open that and they will use lots of that material to facilitate their work of writing an article. The easier you make it for them, the more likely they are to act. Once again, your marketing material, it needs to be good for it to work. And if you are not super confident in your skill of developing this, if you start doing this from your game and outwards, then working that into your game surface, when it comes the time to write your marketing material, you will feel empowered because you know what you need to say to make it attractive, right? This is the beauty of it. This is what makes it really fun. You are designing your game and your game surface in a way that will automatically create very powerful marketing material, and it will be super easy to create your marketing material because you know what you should be focusing on to create a powerful message, right? You are designing this because you are taking this into account since your game's conception, or you are intervening on your game that's already in development right now to make sure that your marketing material will be powerful. The result of a powerful marketing material is that when it's time for people to take some sort of action, they will tend to take that action, right? So when you are getting that marketing material in all its different forms and getting it in front of people, a player will be interested in buying your game. That's the power of well done marketing material. If you get your press kit in the hands of members of the press, they'll be interested in writing articles about your game. Maybe influencers who care about playing your game and showing it to your audience. And it all starts happening because you are planning this from the get-go, right? So you need to have a marketing material that's really good, that's really well done. There are other types, the actual, like the email that you send. Sending the email is outreach, that's promoting. But the text of the email that you send to press, that you send to an influencer, that you send to your followers, that is some sort of marketing material. You can even think of a tweet as okay, I'm trying to do everything at the same time while holding my, mysterious bottle of, magic potion. So a tweet, that's all, it's a short text that has like the goal of having people looking at your game and paying attention to your game and maybe taking some sort of action, right? Retweeting, clicking on a link, talking about it, whatever goal it has some sort of goal. And so that's a type of marketing material, all right? And by the end of this, when we go through all of these things, I'll give you some tips on how to do each of these steps well. And this is actually the third part of this lecture. All right, so stay strong because you need to understand how things connect so that you can do this work well when the time comes. Other super important, I will even put it on the top. Part of your marketing material is your trailer. And here, okay, so your capsule art, already talked about that. Your game's name. Your game's name is part of your marketing material. Why is that? Why you can call your game anything you want? Because, if you come to Steam, you see that, for example here, you see that your name is one of the very few information that will be available for someone who never heard of your game before, right? So some games, they are just more interesting, more attractive than others. And you don't need necessarily to have a great name, but pay attention, and here's a good example actually. You can see lots of successful games that don't have really good names. I'm not talking about any of these in particular. However, these games, they can be successful despite their names not helping sometimes, right? So this is survivorship bias, right? Pay attention to the rules, not to the exceptions, because otherwise you're falling victim to survivorship bias. This is a powerful marketing principle. When you're browsing, any kind of store, you have very little information to decide if you even click on the game to learn more or not, right? So this is Slasher's Keep. I kind of like this name. I kind of like the capsule art. There's some blood going on here. It's interesting enough. So I would click here, click on view page, and now I'm giving a chance to this game and seeing the beautiful art that they made. I'm seeing that it has some reviews going on. It just launched just a couple of days ago, and it already has lots of reviews that are very positive. So this game is popular. This is all information that this sales page is conveying to me, right? And I'm even willing to watch the trailer and see what the game is actually about, how it looks like, what's the vibe of the game, what's the goal of the game. Now, I want you to notice that I gave a chance to this game. I'm even just watching the trailer, maybe even reading this, only because I clicked, right? If I hadn't clicked Oh, I shouldn't have closed that. So Steam. If I hadn't clicked on the thumbnail, I wouldn't know any of this, right? So many times when you're trying to promote your game, you are actually, losing potential customers because they are not even clicking on your thumbnail. They are not even given a chance to see your trailer. You are losing them before that, and very little information is here, and your name is a very big space here. It has a disproportionate effect, right? So ideally, I can't resist. I start giving tips before, right? So, okay, you have to wait a little bit more to know how to name your game, but it's important, right? So these are all examples. Let me see if I have more. Your trailer, your tweets, your press kits, the actual email that you send, the things that you say to influencers. If you're not really typing over an email, or if you're chatting with someone, at some point you have to talk what your game is about. That little description, essentially it's marketing material, right? So it's subject to a strategy that is trying to optimize their odds of wanting to have something to do with your game, right? So we'll get back into marketing material, and we'll talk about the 5-30 close rule. So this is kind of a mental, not really mental, but an actual note to myself. Let's make it a weird color so that I remember when I'm going back through this material to teach you this stuff, right? But for the time being, we are looking at this structure over here, right? So we're talking about what promotion is, and I'll talk later on the third part of this lecture how to promote. Marketing material was this. Now surface and your game, how they connect to all of this, right? So your game's surface. If you have watched other lectures, maybe you already have some idea of what this is. And today, after I explain this, I'll start giving some more, practical advice on how you can work on your game surface to make sure that it generates powerful marketing material that you can then promote efficiently. All right. So let me find where it is in my notes. All right. So let's start with a definition. What is your game's surface? This is so incredibly important, and I want you to start thinking about this all the time. Your game surface is everything. Okay, I'm having some trouble typing. Everything someone knows about your game just by watching a trailer. It's a proxy. That's a good approximation on what your game surface is. You will start learning details that there's more to it than that. Actually, let me see if I can write this. Let me see. Let's do something different here. So I will go full screen and draw it because I have two really good visual examples. Can you see if I draw here? Yes. So I want you to picture this is the ocean and this is an iceberg, okay, that's floating above the water, right? And this analogy it's originally who told me that analogy was Adam Saltzman, right? So here's my plug to him. Adam Saltzman, great developer, really great guy, really helped me with Pro Indie Dev, and he is the creator of games like Overland and Cannabalt, which is very a very famous early indie game. So Adam has this analogy that of everything that you do in your game, which can be represented by maybe like the bottom part of this beautiful iceberg that I'm drawing, your game is this whole thing, but people will judge your game and decide if they will even give it a chance or not only by this tiny part that's apparent before they buy your game, right? So not everything that you do in your game will have a direct relationship with people wanting to know more or not, or wanting to buy or not. Only this tiny part here. Adam calls this surface, actually exposure design, right? I already had a name for this. I call it surface, but it's basically the same idea, right? So this is what your game surface is basically everything that's above the surface. This line represents the act of buying and actually playing your game, right? So once you give it to someone to play, they will be judging or they will be evaluating your game, taking stuff into account like your game's progression system, like the deeper systems, the general story, like the actual plot, what happens and then what happens and then what happens. Someone who's playing for half an hour or 1 hour, they will have an opportunity to experience your game and judge it by the actual experience that you're putting together. Now, think of someone who is actually, and I think I'm still in full screen, but I want you to think of someone who is actually just browsing Steam and they are deciding if they will play your game based only on this very short amount of information right here. And by the way, let me give you one important distinction. There are two relevant layers of surface that you should know. So first layer, people who watched the previous lectures and paid attention are supposed to already know this, right? So if you think that you already know this stuff, here's a little challenge for you. I want you, before I write, if you know what is the first layer and what is the second layer, right? And if you're watching this live or watching this with friends, you can just type in the comments or talk to someone. But what is the first layer of your surface? What is the second layer of your surface? And here is a little tip. The first layer is only this information right here, which is basically the game's name, the game's capsule art or thumbnail, and maybe a handful of screenshots, right? And now, depending on the platform, you might also have access to the amount of reviews that game has, and it shows if the game is popular or not by the amount of reviews, and it shows if the game is well reviewed or not, which basically accounts for the game being good or not, right? It's a proxy that people, when they're making a decision, like in the blink of an eye, they will take into account to decide if they want to learn more about that or not, right? So this is the first layer. It's the game's name plus capsule art, plus some screenshots. And this is the most important one, right? Because people will start only browse, they will only do this and see the other screenshots if the first one is convincing, okay? So this is the first layer. And why is it a separate layer? Because unless I click here somewhere, I won't even see the trailer, right? So you need to optimize this to be attractive. You need to be aware of these things. And there are tricks, and I'll hopefully teach some of them later today. But this is the second layer, right? Maybe it's the trailer, maybe it's a short description. Maybe if I browse here, if I'm deciding if I want to buy or not, maybe I will read this. Most people actually don't, believe it or not. There have been experiments showing that most people don't really care, and just deleting this might not have a real impact, or maybe making something really short here might not have a big impact in people buying or not, right? But the trailer and the short description, but mostly the trailer, they are the second layer, and they are super important. So it's the trailer, just a small, I would say, just the easiest to find info, right? So this is the second layer. And then once again, people would be deciding if they want to learn more about your game or not based on this tiny amount of information that I have just listed here, right? So of course, what, this should be, or should start becoming self-apparent, right? Why is the surface so important? Because your marketing material, it will be leveraging on that surface, right? If you have a strong surface, something that is attractive, then your marketing material will benefit from that. So let me start detailing this a little bit, because I kind of lied to you here, and I apologize for that, but this is not really what your game surface is. This is actually already like a reflex or a representation or a benefit of having a strong surface, right? So let me start digging just a little bit so that you can see what I'm talking about. So this nice little game that I absolutely love talking about because I think it has such a great name. It's called Keep Talking and Nobody Explodes. So you can see why this is powerful, right? If you see this, this name among other names, you are kind of, how the hell does a game like that even work, right? And keep talking and nobody explodes. What does that mean? So that's the first layer. That's part of the first layers, like something like this, like a thumbnail. And then you can see the trailer, which is kind of interesting because it's not showing only the game, but actually people playing the game and showing the dynamics. This is it's very unusual game. I'm not, you don't need to be making something like this to have a powerful surface. I just want you to understand that if the game was not about this, like this assumption here, or if it didn't have like this trait in the mechanics, it wouldn't be possible to name it Keep Talking and Nobody Explodes, right? So there's the actual game, there's the actual rules, that's what the game is actually about. And then there are decisions on how you want to frame that, how you want to talk about the game so that you have a strong surface, right? So another one of my favorite examples by, again, it's a game from one of my friends. Actually, I'm friends with one of the guys who developed this game. I unfortunately didn't have the opportunity to meet the other one. And they did have a really cool landing page. So Ridiculous Fishing, another game that has a great surface design, right? And the art of designing your game so that it's attractive, I call it surface design. So it's called Ridiculous Fishing. Once again, a very baity name that tends to attract clicks, right? And then when they describe it, when they pitched this game to people, they would say that it was a game about fishing with a machine gun or with a shotgun, right? And then as you watch the trailer and you see the game in action, you see that most of the time you are not really using a shotgun to fish, but at the very end of the level, you start shooting. I think my internet or something about the streaming is making it really slow, but you can see that only by the end of each match you are actually shooting fish. Most of the time it's actually a fishing game, as the name would say, right? It's Ridiculous Fishing, but it's about fishing with a machine gun. And I just want to draw your attention to one simple fact here. Especially if you have played the game, you know that you could totally have this game, only the fishing part of it. This is already a great game. It's super cool, right? I have played, I have got to the end. I highly recommend this game. And it would work without the shotgun part. However, by having this small part of the gameplay right here, where you actually have to shoot the fish before they count to your score, they can say that the game is about fishing with a shotgun. Do you realize the power of that? Because of this small mechanic that happens at the end of the match, they are capable of phrasing their game in such a powerful way that people want to learn more about it. And all of a sudden, they are not among 1,000 thumbnails anymore, because people clicked on the game that's called Ridiculous Fishing. It's a weird name, it's an interesting name. And then when they get to the sales page, they are basically facing this message that this game is about fishing with a shotgun. And this is powerful, right? So they gave them this power. So many people will do this. Many of the most talented developers will do this by instinct. Just, when conceiving a game, thinking if the game has a strong angle, or if it doesn't have, if there's a way to add it, so that, to add this to the game so that you can talk about the game using those patterns. Other people will do this more deliberately, right? So you can either do this by instinct, or deliberately. So those are two ways of implementing a really powerful surface. So how do you do this? By instinct, by being in the game for a long time. You start developing naturally an instinct of what draws people attention, what people tend to click on, tend to talk more about, which kinds of stories the press tends to pick on and actually promote. You start developing like an instinct for that, and then naturally everything that you do will probably incorporate traits that will make it have a powerful surface, right? So one good example is another one of my friends, Edmund Macmillan. You probably heard of this guy because he's an incredibly famous, successful developer, and he has games like The Binding of Isaac. He has one of the two developers of the original Isaac, one of the two developers of Super Meat Boy, and everything that he does tends to have a very strong, very, very strong surface, right? It's weird, it's interesting, it's unique, and he does that partially by instinct. Everything he does has a very unique trait to it that tends to be attractive. It's not only being different, it's not only being weird, it actually needs to be different in a way that people find interesting, basically, that people are attracted to, right? And the other way, of course, is deliberately. And why is this important? It's because you can't be right now, if you have been working on games for, I don't know, 6 months, you don't have the option of having 20 years of experience, right? Especially if you have not been shipping games for a couple of decades, it's natural that you don't have this instinct, right? So the other option is doing this deliberately, which is understanding these principles that I'm teaching, learning some tricks to make your surface more powerful, and then embedding that on purpose into your game and making sure that you design your game and that you polish your game in a way where that part feels integral, it feels a real part of the actual game, right? So how do you do this? You do this by understanding the marketing principles and some possible tricks. For example, keep talking and nobody explodes. That's a impossible premise right in the name. So having an impossible premise described in your game's name is one trick that you can do to have a powerful surface, right? So FGJS people, of course, you recognize this as an attention magnet, right? So this is one of the 35 attention magnets. I think there are probably 8 or 6 that are specifically about how to name your game. So this is an attention magnet called the impossible premise name. So understand some of these marketing principles and some possible tricks and embed that into your game, right? So this is how you can do it. And I'm really trying to fight my instinct of already teaching what you should be doing, but this is just some initial tips. Okay, so let's get back here. So once again, you want to make sales. For that, you need to promote your message. What you'll be promoting is technically a marketing material, whether you know that or not, and that material can be strong or can be weak. Powerful material will lead to people taking action. Weak material will lead to people basically ignoring it, right? And your marketing material, it will be very reliant on your game's surface, which means basically your game giving your marketing material the power that it needs, right? So your game has a fishing, basically it has a part of the game that's about shooting fish with a shotgun. This gives your marketing material the power to say that this is a game about fishing with a machine gun or with a shotgun, right? So this is how aspects of your game, more specifically of your surface, will affect your marketing material, right? So either you do this with some tricks or you embed this into your game. I will always recommend that you do both, right? So don't underestimate the power of a good name and a good capsule art, because this has a disproportionate effect. But also make sure that your game actually is about the thing that you are promoting, right? Having a really weird name that leads people into clicking because they think it's about something else, and then they click and they watch the trailer and the game has nothing to do with what they thought, it won't work, right? It's like a funnel. People will click on the thing, they will not like it, and then they will just close the window and go back to what they're doing, right? And Steam or other platforms will realize that nobody that they show the game is actually clicking to buy, nobody's actually interested in the game, so naturally they will stop recommending the game, right? So you need to attract people with something that actually gets them all the way through the journey of learning about your game and wanting to take action and actually buy your game, right? You need to have a coherent message. It's not, you don't want to be trying to hack this, by making a really weird name to your game and then saying that your game is about something and then it's just about something completely different, and because it just won't work, right? When it gets to the time of promoting, people will see what it is, see that it's not really what you promised in your marketing material, and they will not take action, right? So principles are important, right? Principles are important. You're trying to sell something to someone, and there's some basic honesty that's expected there, right? Some basic integrity that's expected there. You don't want to be clickbaiting people into looking at your game, because that will only make them see your sales page and they will be disappointed, they will close, and it will not work for you, right? So we need to do some hard work here. You need to do some hard work in actually integrating those interesting characteristics into your game so that your game is actually about that, okay? And I realize some people would just like me to just tell them what to do, just do this and that, like a straightforward step by step where you are just following blindly without understanding anything, and then you just try to copy that. But if you don't understand these principles, if you don't understand like the logic of why things are structured that way, you probably try to follow the process, but you end up having a bad result anyways, because in the implementation is where the devil is, right? Speaking a little bit like Yoda here, right? So the implementation is where the devil is. And the thing is, you need to understand why you are optimizing your game surface. You want to understand why, what is the reason, because you need a powerful marketing material, because you are going to send it to someone and you want people to open your email, right? So this is why it's important. So you don't want to be like trying to embed tricks without understanding the context, because it just won't work, right? You need to understand the foundations, because when you are there in the battlefield and you are actually implementing those things in your game, nothing will be obvious, right? So you need to take a step back and see what applies to your game, what applies to your case, to your circumstances, right? So if you are once again starting to get distracted, back here, this is important stuff. This is like the time that you are investing, that's just a little bit that you'll be working on your game for months, sometimes even for years. And your financial results, your sales, the amount of people that will actually play your game will be very much affected by these decisions that you'll be making right now. So this is super important. You need to be paying attention, because once again, if I could go back in time and teach me this stuff, my life would have been so much easier. So I'm doing my very best here every week to make sure that you don't have to go through the problems that I went, that you can take a more straightforward path to your own success. And so this is why this is important, okay? So let's move back to our handy whiteboard, and I'm going to start talking about, okay, so what you should be doing, So this is the third part of our lecture, okay? So we'll go back one by one, and I'll try to give the best advice I can into a reasonably short lecture, so that you can start, applying the most important stuff and having the best possible outcome, right? So if some of this feels abstract, you can see immediately how it applies, I want you to not give up on the lecture, right? That's what weak people do. That's the dreamers, maybe if you've been following me, you already know this. Like 90% of people, 90% of people are dreamers. Then we have about 8% which are learners. Those will stay to the end. Is it learners? This is correct. Okay, so what are dreamers? Dreamers, they want to make games. They think they want to make games, but they actually don't. What they want is to dream about making games. Because when it's time to put the hard work, either to stay here to the end and learn this stuff, they would just give up before, because they want to watch like shorter videos about game design that are just more fun, and they don't actually want to learn the deep stuff, right? So those are dreamers. They will always be dreaming about making games. And if you are a hobbyist, it's totally fine to be a dreamer, right? Then you have the people who are committed enough to be here and learn, but they will leave this lecture and will not apply anything. And then we have the 2%. right? The 2% who are the warriors. And those are the 2% of people that I'm optimizing these lectures for, right? I'm expecting you to be here to the end to learn all this stuff, but then leave here and start applying, right? Actually taking action. Because if you don't move, if this doesn't affect how you work on your day to day, this is just, procrastination, right? So I think maybe, I don't think there's a reason for you to be here if you're not committed to taking action, really, right? And one of these actions is just staying to the end, okay? So what you should be doing. Let me move back to my notes. And the first thing is, depends on where you are in your project, okay? So depending on at which step you are in your project, you should be doing one of these different things. So from IgG to alpha, IgG is idea gen and greenlighting, right? This is a FGGS term. I have already explained that in lecture number 3, I believe. So if you haven't watched that, and hopefully if it's still available in the channel, go there and watch it. But it's basically you generating ideas and then choosing one to work on, and then defining what is the best possible way to work on that thing, and then actually starting prototyping and then developing, right? So all the way from conception to alpha, and if you're still developing your mechanics, you're still figuring out stuff like long-term player retention. If you don't know this stuff, stay here, because you need to start getting those things to gradually sink into your brain, right? This is the professional layer of knowledge that you need. So even if it feels a little bit hard, right? But if you are still developing your long-term retention mechanics, if you are still developing your basic game loop, all those things, you are technically still in alpha development, right? So if you're still in alpha development, what you should be focusing is on surface design, okay? So what is surface design? It's designing your game's surface. It's basically a better way of phrasing that is making your game, basically developing your game while making sure that you are giving your future self a bazooka for when the time to actually promote your game comes, you have that weapon at your disposal, right? So developing your game while being aware that you will need to promote it someday, okay? So it's just being aware, understanding what is your game surface, and then, doing stuff to make that surface as attractive as possible. And I'll get into that into a lot more details. But the other thing that you need to be doing is audience validation, right? So you see that I'm not saying, for example, that you should be tweeting or that you should be keeping a devlog unless you're doing it for the social aspects of it. It's not, promoting is not very efficient now at this moment of your development. Now, one good exception to that is audience validation, right? That means basically you pitching your game. So you are starting to think in terms of what your surface is, what is the definition of your game. And one good thing to do early on is to pitch your game to the same audience that is supposed to be buying your game in the future, right? And if you don't know who those people are, it's fine. I will teach how to do proper market research for game development in one of the future lectures. But you need to at least figure out some similar games. People who are supposed to play your game when you launch it, which games are they playing right now? Or which games have they played in the past? Because if you identify 1 or 2 games that, the same audience will probably like your game, you can get into the forums or into some Facebook group or into some Discord of players who are fans of those games, and just pitch the game to them. Do this in a way that's conscious, in a way that you are not breaking any rules of the forums that you're getting into. I'm not telling that you should be promoting your game, because sometimes that can be really annoying. You get into a forum and start to only talk about you and your game, and you just got there and you're all about promoting your stuff. This is really boring. This is annoying. People don't like that. So that's not what I'm recommending you to do. What I'm saying is get into one of these forums of, that have people that are probably going to like your game because they have liked other games. For example, it's a platformer. I don't know, maybe there's a forum of people talking about Super Meat Boy, or maybe another newer game, like more new game. And you can get there and say, hey, I'm thinking about making a game that is like this, this, and that, right? And you would try to define your game in a way that's interesting and see how people react. See if they catch it or not. See if people will even respond or like or give you an opinion or not, right? Later on, when you are a little bit more advanced into your game development, when it gets to a point where you can actually create some sort of art that would be like a representation, like a very early version of your capsule art. For example, you come up with a name and with the capsule art, and then you can promote that, or you can try to show that to people and ask if they think that game would be interesting, right? This is a very easy thing that you can do early in your game development, maybe somewhere during the middle of your alpha, when you have kind of figured out the basic mechanics and how you're going to pitch your game, because that's part of your surface design. And then when you have some sort of representation of that in the form of maybe an image or maybe the game's name, you can try and do another validation just to see if you're going in the right direction, see how people react, see if they have any complaints, any objections. You can even do something, so forums, just to keep this organized. So pitch in forums and see if people react. Or actually, okay, this is see if people react, or how, see if or how people react. Okay, so this is an early form of validation, just to make sure that you are committing your next, I don't know, several months to maybe a couple years into something that people will actually care about. That, if it's an impossible premise, like keep talking and nobody explodes, that I mentioned before, make sure that this has traction by just trying it before the game even exists, right? This is one lean principle that you should start applying. Then you can also validate in those same places a more developed marketing material mockup. For example, like a mockup of your capsule art plus bullets explaining what your game is. Just post that in a forum and see, hey, and say something like, hey, I'm making this game. It's very advanced into development. If that is, I'm not. You shouldn't lie. And I just want to see if you guys think this is interesting, right? So these bullets, you have thought about them during your surface design, right? And this capsule art, you are making it in a very deliberate manner to show the most interesting, most baity parts of your game in a way that's also true, where if people were actually watch a trailer, when there is one, they will like the trailer and they will consider buying your game, right? So you can validate those things even before actually developing the game. So this is one of the things that you should be doing early, right? From idea, let me write this down, idea, gen, and greenlighting to alpha, right? So from when you start conceiving your game all the way to when you're still developing mechanics, those are things that you can do that will help you, be more, feel more, a little bit safer in terms of whether you're betting your time into something that will have traction or not. So this is a good reason for you to be in forums, to be tweeting. You can use those venues to try and validate that. And the other thing that I wanted to, this is a bonus one because this wasn't in my script. And this is advanced. If lots of people ask me to, I will give a specific lecture teaching how to do that. But you can use actually paid advertising to discover, to find out what is the best possible first layer. So remember when I talked about the 2 layers of your game's surface? This is something that you can very easily use some paid advertising to very cheaply discover what is the strongest possible approach. And honestly, if I had invested like a couple years into developing a game, I wouldn't have the guts to go to market, to actually start selling without doing some sort of paid advertisement, just to test that. So how do you do that? You will develop something like this. For example, your game's name plus capsule art. And you will not develop just one. So let me tell you how you do this. Develop a game name plus capsule art. Actually, a few game names plus capsule arts, right? So develop a few. Maybe you can name your game in 4 or 5 or 10 different ways, and I'll talk a little bit about that in this lecture, right? But there are some different angles that you could explore to do that. And if you're not sure which one is the strongest, you can narrow down by just, trying to look at some mocap of how your game would look like in the middle of a Steam page, right? Just use Photoshop to prototype that and see how you feel. Is that approach strong or not? And then when you come up with like a few strong approaches by maybe combining a different image with a different name, and you have like 4 or 5 different candidates, you can just use some paid advertising, for example, on Facebook or on Google Ads. And I would recommend Facebook because it's just easier. You promote that game, like those 5 different creatives. The name of that in digital marketing is creative. It's basically an image with a small text. And you promote that to different people, and you see which one has the greatest click-through rate, right? So which is the approach, which is the capsule art that when you have on Steam, we have more people clicking on it, right? And if you can, if it's possible for you, you can do something like, for example, so let's keep organized here. Promote, use paid advertising to show that to people and encourage them to click to learn more, right? So you are having these 4 or 5 different potential capsules or potential names, and you're promoting, and Facebook will automatically show you, the percentage of people who are clicking on each one of them. The one that has the highest click rate is the one that is more baity, right? It's probably the one that will have the most clicks on Steam or on Switch or on the App Store or wherever, right? So we want to test that because this has a huge effect on your game's potential revenue. And if you can, create a landing page. I already talked about that. So create a landing page for your game. It can be really, really short, with a mail sign-up form, and see how much it costs to have people signing up to learn more. I think it's an email sign-up form, and see how much it costs to have people signing up to learn more for each candidate. Okay, so if you have like 5 candidates, you see which one will have the better results. And the thing here is that you are not only validating clicks. If you can do this, it's a little bit more complex. Once again, if you guys really want, let me know, and I can make a specialized lecture teaching how to do that and showing some real examples. But if you can have, like in your landing page, some more description of what your game actually is, and then a sign-up form. The thing is, people will be taking action. In order for you to be here, for most of you to be here, you have to go basically through a landing page, right? So I'm guessing many of you got here because you saw this landing page right here, right? So what am I doing here? I'm basically describing, which are the reasons why you should be paying attention to this stuff, why this is important, and then I'm actually asking you to give your email, right? So when you click here and type your email and subscribe, and then show up here, you are showing me that you are interested in this stuff. And the same principle will apply to your game, of course, right? So if you're here, it proves that this thing works, right? And I want you to apply the same kind of logic to your game. So you can create a landing page, talk a little bit about what your game actually is, and see just how many people, for each creative, for each approach, how many people actually subscribe it, and you can see the cost, right, for that. Usually the lower the cost per creative, the more optimized it will be for you to use that surface in your game, right? Because you are kind of simulating the process of, someone basically being impacted, it's another digital marketing term, basically getting to see something like this in your Facebook ad, for example, they will see this and maybe some short phrase, and they will click, right? That's click rate. You are measuring that. And here on Steam, people are going to watch your trailer and see other screenshots and read some, read some information about the game and decide whether to buy the game or not. When you're talking about a more simple landing page like the one I just showed for Pro Indie Dev, you're asking for them to take some sort of action as well. It's not the same as buying, but it shows some sort of interest, right? So if you can get that kind of interest to one of the approaches but not the others, it's really good that you found that out before actually putting your game and choosing your capsule art and deciding your game's name, right? Because this will have like a huge impact on how many sales you make. Can you see the parallel here, right? So if you want to know more details about how to do that, I can definitely do that. So just make sure to let me know. All right. So you can use paid advertising to find out what is the best possible first layer. Basically, what you're doing is validating your general marketing approach, and through pitching, through doing some of these tricks that I just talked about, right? And of course, even before that, you are trying to figure out what is the powerful angle that you're going to use to design your game. So this is what you are doing at this moment. So I have some extra tricks for you here. I just want to, okay, so there's basically two moments that I want to talk about. So idea gen and green lighting to alpha, and you are basically working on your surface. I'll get back and talk more about that. But then you have these other moments. It's from late alpha to maybe mid beta development. You are, let me see how I'm formatting this. Okay. So from late alpha to mid beta, what you probably want to be doing is at some point, you want to start, you want to announce that your game exists. Usually when you do that, you will start committing that your game will be like this, and that, and not like, in a different way. The mechanics will be this and not that. So usually it's better to start doing this when you are already more sure of what worked and what didn't work, right? So that you can actually announce the thing that you are going to develop, right? So this is one of the problems of starting to announce too early, because you start feeling stuck to a design that you have already promised it to players. And if that design doesn't work because you haven't developed that yet, or because you haven't really figured out a way to make it work yet, you feel like this pressure of not changing the game. And if you are during your alpha, especially early alpha, you want to have that flexibility, right? I have talked a lot about that, about all the reasons that you have to be flexible during alpha in lecture number 3, and also how to do an efficient development process in that same lecture, right? So if you haven't watched it, make sure to go back and watch it, because it's important. Stay to the end now, but then afterwards, if that is still available, of course, go back to the channel and watch it, because this is important, right? So you need to be very fast during your alpha development, very lightweight. So you need to be able to change things quickly as a response to how you see your game evolving, basically, right? And so you want to postpone announcing your game at least until you are more or less locked into a specific set of mechanics, a specific set or a specific way of defining what your game is, right? So that you are making sure that you are announcing something that will exist and that you'll be able to deliver. Okay, so usually this comes from late alpha to mid beta. I would say, if you can, wait a little bit longer, because it's better, because you'll be more sure that your art style will work, that your production workflow is something that's viable. If you are even considering announcing like a potential release date, honestly, you won't have a good idea of when that will be. You'll just be wildly guessing, unless you are mid beta, even after that, right? Because remember that after beta, you'll still be wrapping up your game, and then promoting and actually publishing your game. So you have time to do the promotion properly. Usually, actually, I think that's the next step. So before release, you are also doing promotion, and that is, trying to build up hype and have people talking about your game. So before release, you'll be doing that, right? and also conversion, especially if you understand a little bit about paid advertising, or if you're working with a publisher that's doing that. But usually that's when you're trying to convert people, right? Either, if it's before release, probably you're trying to convert them to wish lists, or I would personally recommend, and that's probably not a very common approach, but I think it's way better. Try to get them into a mailing list instead of wish list, because that will tend to give you more power to communicate whenever you want. The number of wish lists, Valve recently reviewed, as I'm recording this, that it doesn't really have a huge importance in terms of how much they will promote your game within Steam. They care more about how many people are actually buying your game, right? So if your game is performing well financially, Steam and Valve will understand that your game is interesting to people who like that type of game. So it start highlighting it more, right? So the number of wish lists, it only has to do with how many people will actually buy your game. And if that's why you are asking people to wishlist your game, if you have them signing up to a newsletter, you can email them, at the same moment when they would be notified that the game is released by Steam. So by having the email and talking to them yourself, you have the power to do that when you want, and even how many times you want, right? So you can start focusing conversion before release on maybe getting people into a newsletter or wish lists if you want, right? Whatever applies in your case. And once the game is released, you're focusing on getting people to actually buy your game, right? So usually we do some sort of paid advertising, even if you can't do that, or if the scope of the game that you are working on is too small to justify that, or if you don't have the budget, you try to get conversions by basically building up hype and have people talking about your game, and at some point you're basically announcing that the game is out there, right? So getting in touch with journalists, with streamers, and saying, hey, the game is already available for you to buy, right? So people need to know that, and some of them will click on the game, and some of them will buy the game, right? So you're, before release, before and after release, actually, you are basically doing this, okay? So I'm simplifying a bit. We are not over focused on promotion right here, but I'll give some extra tips on how to do some of those things still in this lecture. But I want to start going back and talk about, surface design. Which are some practical things that you can start doing right now to improve your game's odds of being successful, right? So let me create a separate session for that. So surface design, few practical tips that you can start applying. The first one, and I'm hoping that you already know what this is, it's the high jump principle, right? If you don't know what that is, it's one of my, I think on lecture number 2, I talked a lot about that. But, in short, simplifying it, you want to create some sort of comparison parameter to your game, and then jumping way over the expectations that you have set yourself, right? So many people don't do that deliberately. They just start working on a game without being aware of which games they are going to be compared against, and they end up not jumping as high as the bar that they have established themselves when they, committed to certain types of art, some certain genres, certain features. They end up jumping lower, and that makes your game be perceived as low quality, right? And that is one huge surface design problem, right? No amount of tricks, no amount of, attention magnets, or any hacks that you try to use, none of that will compensate for a game that feels low quality. Really, you need to work on that deliberately, right? So the high jump principle is one of the most important things to help you do that. The other thing is market fit. So let me give you some specific things that you should be paying attention to. You need to understand who your audience is. So once again, I already talked about that. Similar games. You need to understand who will be playing your game. You need to understand genre expectations, which is those people who are playing other games that are similar to yours. What do they expect from that type of game? And what I want to focus the most here when talking about market fits is avoid anti-magnets. Okay, so anti-magnets, once again, it's an FGGS term. I'm going to explain some of the most important ones. But if you have to choose between having lots of tricks and a very hooky name and a very clickbaity thumbnail, either that or avoiding anti-magnets, I would say 100 times out of 100 times avoid anti-magnets. This is priority number one, right? No amount of smart marketing will fix these problems over here. So you need to make sure that you are not stepping on any of these problems, right? So the best way to do that, if you don't want to get into a lot of details, is just apply the high jump principle, bonsai version, rule of twice, all those nice things that I have already taught. Now I want to get into more details because there are some very, very common mistakes that I see indie games making all the time, and many times they will like jump, how do you say that in English? They will basically step on one or more of these landmines, because these are marketing landmines, and then their game will not perform well, and then they'll say that the market is saturated, that there are too many people making games, but they don't realize that they have these huge market fit problems, right? So let me start talking about that. So the first one is lack of polish, right? So if your game feels unpolished, no matter how you describe your game, people will just prefer to play something that feels more professional, right? So you need to learn juiciness. I have already talked about that a bit in past lectures, but you need to understand and know how to do juiciness. You need to understand, you need to use the high jump principle to your art. You need to figure out bonsai versions to art styles. So you need to have like a smart art folder. I have already talked about all of that, mostly in lecture number 2, right? But you need to avoid lack of polish at all costs, because this is probably the king of anti-magnets, right? Another one is, features all over the place. So I want to even give you a more visual example of that. So I want you to imagine that this is the entire potential audience of your, it's not even only your game, maybe everyone that has Steam installed, for example, or maybe the Epic Store, or whatever platform, and each of these dots is, I don't know, represents like a few thousand people, for example. And then when you say that you are making an indie game, and I'm being very generous here, when you say that you are making an independent game, or any game at all that can be made by one person, or maybe just a few people, only a few potential players will actually be interested in that, right? So this is the first thing that happens. You are making an indie game, not Grand Theft Auto, right? It's not AAA next-gen graphics. So many people will not play your game just because of that, right? And it's a fact, because this is still a huge amount of people, right? So all of those successful indie games that I have showed before, which has sold like millions and millions of copies, they are within this space, most of them, right? But then you are saying that you are making like an action game, right? And so there are some people who like action games, either indie or not, and there are some people who don't like action games at all, regardless of being indie or not, right? And right now, because your game is indie and it's action, it's only going to attract these people over here, right? And then, this is okay. This is kind of a good way of thinking in terms of market fits. Usually have some people that care more about, I don't know, strategy. Other people like, RPG mechanics. Other people like action, and so, or other people like, so some of the main ones are really like strategy, action in general. Doesn't matter if it's platforming, if it's top-down shooter or whatever. There are some bigger genres like FPS, for example. Then you have strategy, story, action. Maybe there are some more niche things like, for example, sports games, racing games. But those are some of the broader categories, right? And if you are thinking in those terms, it's okay. Now imagine, for example, that you are making an action game, and then you say, okay, but besides controlling this character in an action environment, you also have to strategize a lot and think really hard in terms of where you want to invade next, right? And so this is a strategy component, right? And so now you are making something that only players who like strategy games will appreciate, but it's also an action game and it's also an indie game, right? So right now the only intersection that we have is this one, right? So we are talking about a smaller audience. To some degree, you may want to do that because you can get into more narrow spaces than AAA by making something that's more niche and make something that's really, really, really attractive to a smaller audience and still have, a pretty big audience in the end, right? Now, if you start doing some really crazy things, like for example, it also has a very important part of the game that has some racing mechanics, right? And this is people who like racing. And then it also has like this real-time strategy aspect to it, and then RPG aspects to it. And all of a sudden, your game is all over the place, and there's no single person who likes all the aspects of your game. And so they watch the trailer and they start liking the game, but then at some point they start seeing some evidence that the game has more than what they wanted, right? So, sometimes people want to be like super innovative because they are afraid that nobody will play their game, nobody will care, and they end up adding too much innovation, or sometimes innovation in different areas that are not compatible with each other, right? Many times this happens when you are working on what I call your dream game, right? So you're trying to make maybe your first game or your first big game to be like everything that you ever dreamed about in your game. All the aspects are there, right? And you end up with something that's, probably impossible to finish. It's like too complex, and also, it just feels too weird, too different. People don't have like a reference to what that thing looks like, right? So we want to strike the right balance. Let me go back to the board here. So try to strike the right balance between innovation and familiarity, right? Because when people who have limited times, you are competing against Netflix, you are competing against all sorts of hobbies that they could, have. They want to have some sort of certainty that they are investing their time and their money into something that they will like, right? So if the game feels too weird, it's just if they will probably end up choosing something that they are more comfortable, that they are more, they have a higher confidence that they will like, So features all over the place, trying to innovate too much or trying to do, merge too many things into one single game. You can pull that off successfully if you're doing this in a smart way. So one very good example of that is Crypt of the Necro Dancer. And I'm really counting on autocorrect and Google to help me because I'm typing while looking at the other screen. So this is a game by Ryan Clark, very talented developer from Canada, and he basically gave a talk to Pro Indie Dev a couple years ago that's still available on his YouTube channel, where he talks about the marketing and all the strategizing, the surface strategizing that went into creating this game and his other games, right? And basically this is a game that mixes roguelike mechanics with rhythm game mechanics, right? So this is very unusual. So what you see here is that besides being indie, besides being pixel art, which are already narrowing the audience, it also chose to be in two big, kind of different genres at the same time. So rhythm game and roguelike. And they managed to pull this off because, everything else is kind of standard, right? So this is a pretty standard fantasy setting. They're not inventing something completely out there. It's kind of standard. It's recognizable, it's interesting, it's familiar enough that he managed to pull this off, right? So this is a success example. What you don't want to do is, either, innovate everywhere, everything is different, the story is strange, and the setting is strange, and the genre is difficult to define, and all of a sudden you have something that's very, very difficult to explain, that people will feel unsafe about putting their money and time when they could be, playing something that they are pretty sure they will like. All right, so features all over the place is one kind of common anti-magnet, right? So the big list of anti-magnets. Let's organize this thing so that you don't feel lost. So next one, and I need to go back to my lecture notes. So another one, and FGGS people, you will notice that there are some new anti-magnets here. Those are inner cases of bigger anti-magnets that I have taught you, but I want to specify them, so this could also prove helpful, because those are more like common cases, right? So some specific ways of stepping on those landmines. One that's very common is made for kids in the wrong platform. So I have these names for anti-magnets because sometimes I like to refer to them, made for kids, for example. People already know what I mean. It's one specific anti-magnet. What does that mean? It's when the hero of the game, like the main character, looks literally like it's from a cartoon that's made for kids, right? So I have some examples here. And by the way, quick disclaimer. I haven't played any of the games that I'm going to show, and I'm always afraid of showing a game as an example of something that was done that could be done better. And I don't mean any offense to the developers of these games. I haven't played, and they are quite possibly some good games, right? I just want to use them as examples of something that maybe have hurt their financial results, and that other people can also learn from that, right? But this is basically just me guessing, okay? So this is the quick disclaimer. This is my opinion, right? I might be wrong, okay? So in my opinion, this is a game that, because of the art style, because of actually Steam doesn't work really well when it's full screen. Okay, it's working. It looks too much, and especially if you listen to the music and the sounds, you see that it kind of reminds World of Goo in a way. But World of Goo, for several little art reasons, it feels more mature. It feels more like nonsensical and well developed artistically. Whereas this game feels a little bit too much like, the characters and the environments. Probably someone who's like 5 years old would love that game, would love the visuals. It looks cute, it looks pretty, it's super, super well polished, right? They did a great job in all of that. Now, the only problem is that I think most of the audience that's on Steam is not, 5 years old or 10 years old. They're older. So this feels a little bit too childish to them. And, if the game just looked a little bit darker, or just a little bit more, more compatible with someone a little bit older, they might even give it a try. But you can see that many people haven't even tried that game, right? So this is one way where you can have this problem. So I think I have a couple other examples here. So I want to draw your attention to this capsule art right here. And I think probably it feels like the hero of a game for kids. Maybe kind of like Bastion, but for some reason it's just not as mature. I'm not saying every character should look like Geralt from The Witcher, right? I'm just saying it's a little bit too much. And then there's other problems, of course. You can see that this game isn't even like completely ported to a widescreen format. It's probably a port from a mobile game. And it's no wonder that it really, really affects the game's success, because it doesn't really feel like a good fit for the platform. This is another absolutely beautiful, gorgeous game that didn't do well on Steam, and I think part of that is, this is because the game looks a little bit too childish to the average player on Steam, and you have to wait for, I don't know what's going on really. It's really weird, because the internet is supposed to be working. Actually, you know what? I'll probably start routing, but in the meantime, look at how beautiful, how this game is absolutely gorgeous. Like one of the most cute pixel art games that I have seen in a long time. I absolutely love the character design and all that. And I think the only problem is that it just feels, especially if you see this with the music, it feels a little bit too much like made for kids. Otherwise, more people would give it a try, right? Because it looks polished, it looks high quality. So these are good examples, because those are games that otherwise would probably have a good chance of being successful. But it looks too much like it's meant for kids, right? So another, again, beautiful game. I think it's a shame that it hasn't sold much more than it did. I haven't played, so I don't know if the game has some other problems that I'm unable to identify, but I'm only talking about, designing your surface. And I think this is a significant market fit problem, right? So made for kids in the wrong platform. Another variation of that is kind of looks like made for teen in the wrong platform. So this can also happen. I think the character design specifically, you can see that it kind of looks like, maybe Geralt, but for some reason it feels a little bit more like teen power fantasy. And Geralt and generally The Witcher is very good at doing these power fantasy things, even through character design. Now, the difference between actually managing to get there or almost hitting that target can have a significant impact. One thing that I want to point out is that this game actually performed quite decently. If you do the math here and you calculate how much money they made, you see that by far this is not among the worst performing games. It actually is kind of successful. It has its community going on, and I'll be using this game as an example of another problem that I see sometimes some indies making. I think it's one of the reasons why it hasn't sold way more, because once again, super well polished game, interesting mechanics, it looks interesting, it looks attractive, but I think it has a significant market fit problem. So let's go back to the list. It's over focused on a small audience. Now, this is another counterintuitive marketing concept. Because we are technically independent game developers, because we are indies, we are naturally trying to do something really well for a more niche audience than what AAA could, right? Because we can afford to talk to less people and still be profitable. So focusing on a smaller audience than AAA is not a problem. I think the problem is when you focus too much on an audience that is too small, right? And I think this is part of the problem here. So I think it has, if you see this game, after this, after we finish this lecture, if you search it up, you'll see that it seems to be a really good racing game, or actually a time trial game, right? So people are trying to beat the levels as quickly as they can, right? So it's very good. It's like speed running paradise here, and it has all sorts of features in terms of seeing how you are comparing against other players, your general rank in the leaderboard, how long you're taking to beat the levels and all that. So it seems to have all the necessary features to be a really good speedrunning game, right? And I think this is successful. This is a successful game in many regards. I think they could probably have sold a little bit better if they changed their character, if they changed the name of the game so that it doesn't imply that there's like this huge story and world, because the game really doesn't seem to develop that at all. It has like some cutscenes. It will show some character art that's really well done, by the way, implying that the game has story, but it feels a little bit too, all over the place, because the game clearly is not about, whatever story it happens. At least the gameplay scenes don't show that. It seems to be very clearly a speedrunning game, right? So I think it has this problem, and it also has the problem of showing too many features that are only good for speedrunners. So another thing that I would change here in how they promoted this game is I would probably, even if the game has, stuff like, for example, a leaderboard, I would show this very quickly and not be focusing too much on showing like a countdown on how quickly you are, or not only showing super fast-paced scenes that seem to require a lot of skill. Because me, as a player, what I think is maybe this game is too difficult for me. And I'll be, all my scores will be subject to a leaderboard. So I'm being evaluated if I'm good or not. So probably this game is more like for people who like speedrunning and are hyper competitive. Now, if this game just didn't show me so much information, conveying to me the idea that it's a competitive game, it would create a lower pressure, environment for me, where as someone who plays platformers, I would probably give this game a shot. But it feels a little bit too oppressive. Now, here is the balance that you need to strike, right? Once again, here is trying to strike the right balance between serving an audience really well, which this game does, and also remaining accessible enough that that a broader audience might give it a go, right? So this is one thing that I would recommend to these developers. Just try to make it look a little bit more, look and actually be really good for beginners as well. So if I'm not interested in speed running yet, give me something to interact with. Or if the game already has that, which I haven't played, so I don't know, convey that on the trailer. Maybe something like, Remnants of Nazit. This is a game that has an interesting setting and it has some story going on, and then you show some slow-paced, platforming, so that I can know that I can learn how to play this. It starts slow, and then over time gradually evolve to show more sophisticated mechanics and higher speed gameplay, because then I'll feel like, okay, there's this learning curve and I'll be well received as a noob. I'll be well received in the game and gradually be exposed to this, right? And, oh, by the way, at the end of the trailer, there's also a leaderboard if you want, right? If you want to play competitive, you also can, right? So this is a way to basically, blink, at the audience that really wants to play something like that, something that's more competitive, but also making it accessible to other people, right? So people who might play a well-polished game on Steam, this is a bigger audience. People who like speedrunning games in a very competitive environment, this is a small circle, right? So what you want to do is show, hey, tiny audience that really likes competitive games, this game has features for you, right? You probably really like this game. This should be on your wish list. But also to the rest of the audience, this is an accessible game. So try to make it look accessible. Try to make it be accessible to more people without, this is always something that you need to be paying attention to. Trying to be innovative enough to be interesting, to have some unique angle, but also being familiar enough, and also serving someone really well, but making sure that it remains accessible to more people. And this is a difficult balance to strike. You need to figure out what that means in your particular case, but it's something to keep your eyes on, okay? So try to not over focus on a small audience. Another problem, one graphic style that I absolutely love, and probably one of my personal games will use this style one day, is this kind of NES graphics. So it looks like a very retro game. I think it looks super, I don't know why, but I'm super attracted to this type of graphics. You can even see like the screen distortion here or something simulating that. And I don't know, it just feels like an art style that's very easy to make. Actually, it's super easy to make, and it feels super polished because it's the high jump principle. It establishes a parameter, which is NES games or very retro games, and it establishes that parameter by following the rules of that era and using some tricks to be compared against games of that era, and then it looks polished enough in comparison to NES games, right? So it does that. I think the problem here is that it kind of looks like there's nothing separating this game from being an actual NES game, right? So so I call this the retro unevolved, right? So maybe some of you guys will pick on the joke. If you type here retro evolved, you'll find this beautiful little old game called Geometry Wars, and it kind of does the same thing in terms of establishing a parameter of arcade games. It looks very like a vector graphics arcade game. Now if you see this game, you see that it has way more particles than it would be possible for when games kind of look at like that on PC or arcade, right? So it has all these huge explosions of particles and this distortion field that goes on behind it, lots of things happening. So it's really not a game, it's not really completely retro. It has something different. It's retro evolved. When you go for a retro style, but you don't change anything, and it's so faithful in terms of genre, in terms of gameplay, in terms of what you can do, that it really looks like a game from 30 years ago. Odds are, very, very few people will be interested. It's completely different if you have a game that kind of looks like a little bit like retro. So for another very successful example, Celeste doesn't really look like a game that could be on the Super Nintendo if you know the details of color palettes and all that. But otherwise, it kind of creates a comparison parameter that is at about that style, that art paradigm, and then it delivers this beautifully, right? It shows things that are different here, mechanics that you have never seen, color palettes that you have never seen in a game like that. So this is technically retro evolved as well, right? So it's not a problem to use a retro style, but you need to make sure that you are showing other things that make it clear that this is a new experience. This is not like playing a game from a 30 years old console, right? So this is what you want to make sure that you do. You want to create a parameter and go over that, and also make sure that you are adding something to it. Like it can't really look like an actual game from that era. You can use that style, but you need to show that there's more to it. It has like modern sensibilities to the design and all that, because it will just be using retro the right way. So retro unevolved is one significant anti-magnet, right? So we want to avoid that. And finally, single level game. I have more, but and people from the FGJS will remember more of these anti-magnets, but I just want to touch on the main ones here. Single level game is when you get into a game, for example, a game trailer, and all over the trailer, it seems that you are more or less in the same level, right? And sometimes this is done just because, this is very simple to fix, right? If you even change the background color of your game, or maybe the tile set where a game happens, and you show that there's some variance throughout your game, you give the idea that your game is a little bit more complex, and your game might be a little bit more complex. But if everything looks kind of the same, it feels like the game is probably very, very simple, right? So you will feel like you developed one level and then just copied it and changed the layout, but it will feel like the entire game is repetitive, and it will kind of establish an expectation that your game is too simple, right? So just want to touch very quickly on this one. So let's move back, zoom out a little bit. Where are we? We are talking about designing a strong surface for your game. And so you are applying the high jump principle by establishing a parameter that you can surpass. You are considering marketing fit by understanding who your audience is, making sure that you meet some or most of the main genre expectations. So once again, an important reason for you to use the power of establishing a comparison parameter so that you can over deliver. And we are talking about avoiding anti-magnets, because no amount of tricks in your marketing will compensate for the fact that your game kind of gives some subtle cues to someone who's browsing that it is a low quality game, because in the end this is the final result. Like, people will either feel your game is not super polished, or that your game is not really good, or that your game is not really for them, right? And then all the effort that you put goes to waste, because people don't even know of your game. They are just judging by the surface, right? So you want to make sure that you don't fall into any of these problems. Okay, so we talked about market fit, we talked about high jump principle, about surface. All right, so now finally, to close, I'm going to talk a little bit about promotion. So zooming all the way out to remember the general structure of this thing. You are developing your game, and you are making sure that your game has a powerful surface, so that when the time comes to create your marketing material, it will be a powerful marketing material, something that will explain what your game is in a way that's strong, in a way that's interesting, in a way that generates curiosity and drives action, right? Because then you are going to promote that thing so that you can generate sales. You your game be known to a wider audience, and that audience will hopefully be buying your game, right? So this is how this fits into the general scheme. So let me talk very quickly about some practical tips to help you promote your game. So promotion. Let's move to the next page here. So some practical things you need to understand. I already said that, but this is so important. Really only possible if you did a good job in the previous steps. Okay, not possible, but effective. Trying to get something not attractive in front of a lot of people will only result in maybe people seeing it but then ignoring it, right? So there's no use in just doing promotion if you haven't deliberately designed your surface so that it is attractive. Oh, okay, another one for my FGJS students. Obviously, a part of powerful market fit is attention magnets. Okay, so for people who are not in FGJS, anti-magnets are the opposite of attention magnets. So attention magnets is a list of 35 features that you can pick from to have some of them embedded in your game, right? Now we have already been here for a long time now, and I'm really about to close this lecture, so I won't have the time today to teach attention magnets, right? I'm only going to talk about name because, okay, so I'm supposed to talk about the 530 close rule. This is super important because this is a big part of your promotion. So let me paste it here. I'll have left that mental note or that physical or virtual note to me. And was there something else that I need to talk about? I don't think so. Okay, so we are going to talk about some naming ideas for a game, and that is part of attention magnets, right? So let me see where this fits best. This is part of surface design. So quick game naming tips, or rather approaches, right? So there are probably, I think maybe FGJS people can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there are probably 8 or 6 different types of strategies to name your game. I'm going to talk about, I think there are 3 that I think are some good ideas that you can consider that are more applicable to most games. So one is, I already mentioned, the impossible premise name, right? So for example, if ridiculous fishing was called fishing with a shotgun, that would be an impossible premise name. So the impossible premise is an attention magnet in itself, right? So these are all attention magnets. These will actually be probably 3 attention magnets of the 35 because are some of the ones that apply to naming, right? So impossible premise name. It could be called fishing with a shotgun, and that would be a way to have the premise that feels impossible, which is fishing with a shotgun, right into the game's name, right? So one example of that is keep talking and nobody explodes, right? So this is the attention magnet, the naming attention magnet that was used in that case, right? So this is the impossible premise name. Now you don't necessarily have to have that, right? Because sometimes your game just doesn't have an impossible premise, and it's very, very interesting for other reasons, right? For example, The Witcher. It's a great game. It's a very well promoted. It's a very strong surface, and it doesn't need an impossible premise name to succeed, right? So you don't actually need that. It's just, if it's possible, if your game does have an impossible premise, then consider this, create like a big list of potential names, maybe 30 different ideas for names, and make sure that some of these ideas are generated by trying to highlight your impossible premise in the name, right? And then, this is a way to generate some strong contenders for names that might succeed in your testing that I taught before, right? But impossible premise name is one. Fun name is another one, right? So ridiculous fishing, it sounds kind of weird, it sounds funny, it sounds silly. So, ridiculous reviews. You can see that they are doing this very consistently in their marketing messaging, right? So this is one example. Crypt of the Necrodancer, right? So it's a dancer and a necromancer. So there's a pun in there, of course. I don't want to have to explain that, but this kind of draws attention. So it's interesting, and because that game is actually funny and it plays with being a well-humored game all the time, because it positions itself as being like a funny game, then the pun name works for that game, right? If you're trying to make a pun name for The Witcher, that might not attract the right audience, and worst of all, people who might be interested in the premise of what The Witcher actually is might not even take a look at the game, right? And of course, when you're talking about a big budget game, there's marketing dollars making sure that you see the game, right? But when you're playing a low budget or no budget scenario, which is most of us here, then you need to consider the possibility of using your name to attract that audience. And if The Witcher had chosen to be called something funny, like using a pun name, probably many people, and they didn't have a marketing budget, and it wasn't a AAA game, probably people who would be interested in that type of RPG, in that type of vibe, would never click to know, and they would never watch the trailer, and so they wouldn't know that the game is for them. They would end up scrolling and playing another game, right? So this wouldn't work for any game. But if it's a funny game, if this is an angle that you are working in your game, it makes sense in your case, then you can consider that and generate some ideas using this approach as well, right? And finally, the one that almost never fails, and if you can't really find any better approach, you can go for this one, because this tends to be powerful as well. It is the mood seller. The mood seller. So it's a attention magnet for names, where you're basically trying to evoke the mood, the general vibe of your game with your with your game's name. So let's browse Steam and see if we can find some examples of that. So okay, we already have like a couple. So Hearts of Iron, for example, and notice the whole, we have to look at the whole package here, right? So the capsule art, the name of the game, and the kind of vibe that it's evoking. Hearts of Iron, it's evoking like a very war feeling. Hearts of Iron, like being brave, something like that, but also reminds me of the machines, maybe the tanks. So it's kind of evoking the types of vibes that someone who might find this game interesting would be attracted to, right? So instead of having like a very generic name that doesn't mean anything, you can have something that kind of evokes a vibe. Among Us, for a recent example, something that was very successful, and it's right here. It kind of evokes the vibe, it touches on the premise of the game. There's like someone infiltrated Among Us who is the killer, and it kind of evokes the vibe as well of paranoia, of not knowing who is the person who's sabotaging everyone else and all that. So this is a little bit in the mood seller space, a little bit in the impossible premise space. And here you can see other, I don't know, maybe slasher skip, for example. It doesn't sound like super creative when you see, but if you're someone who likes these types of game, knowing that the game is in a keep and that you'll be slashing things, or maybe that will be someone trying to slash you and there's blood here, it kind of evokes the right vibe, probably, right? So, these are all examples of mood seller attention magnets for names, all right? And let me give you another, one thing that you should not be doing with your name, and that is the Eat My Lore anti-magnet. Eat My Lore is when you don't really realize, or maybe like you're showing that you're assuming that people care about your story and about your lore and about your game's world before you have given them a reason to care, right? So for example, imagine that instead of The Witcher, which is a mood seller, imagine that I was, I don't know, maybe naming the, like for example, the butcher of, what's the name of the thing? Probably The Witcher fans are raging right now because I can't remember. The butcher of Blaviken, which is actually one of the names that The Witcher is known for. But because I'm using this Blaviken word, imagine, for example, this is an even better example. Imagine that this game was called Blaviken instead of The Witcher. I don't know what a Blaviken is, right? If I haven't played, if I haven't read the, or watched the series, I wouldn't know what a Blaviken is. So, you're just expecting me to know. Or maybe, I don't know, something like the invasions on Blaviken. And I don't care about that. Maybe I will be attracted to the word invasions. I would think maybe it's I don't know, a horde, you'll be controlling an army, or maybe you'll be like it's an RTS. So maybe the word invasion will work together with Blaviken, but just putting the name of your geography there, the name of a character that means nothing to a player, and you must be careful with that. It might convey the idea that you are kind of amateurish with your game, because this is kind of rookie's mistake, and it shows up where you are caring too much about your own little world, about your own little characters. And what a professional marketing professional will do is make sure that you are attracting people by things that are familiar to them and attractive, and only then, when they are in the game, you start teaching the name, you start talking about the geography, about the lore, all that. But when you seem too eager to express your lore, even through your name, which is literally the first information that many people will know about your game, it sounds a little bit amateurish. So make sure to avoid this anti-magnet as well, because this is one thing that you don't want to be doing with your name, right? And once again, for the people who like to find exceptions to every rule, of course there are exceptions to this rule, right? So if you are smart and you're trying to optimize your odds, you're paying attention to the rules and not the exceptions. All right, so, and now we are actually ready to start talking promotion. Now, as you can see, we have talked a lot about surface design and about improving your game's inherent attractiveness, so that you can create marketing material that's powerful. Because promotion itself, let me write this down. Promotion is legwork, really. It's basically just putting the time and investing a couple weeks of your life at the end of your development process to start getting your message out there, right? So you are creating stuff like a press kit, you are creating stuff like a press list of people who are potentially interested in talking about games like yours, right? So let's go with the Celeste example. You can come to Google and type Celeste, and you can see that the game was released on January 25, 2018. So let's search Celeste. Let's go to tools, and let's narrow this so that we are only seeing stuff from, what was it, 2018? I probably should have done like this. So let's go to a new tab. 2018, right? So Celeste, then you come here. I'm teaching you how to create a very powerful press list. So a list of people that you should be emailing when it's time to launch your game, so that there is a good chance that they will write an article about your game, right? So how do you find those journalists that might be interested in your game? So if you want, I can give a more detailed explanation on this in a future lecture. But right now, I just want to do is show you a very easy approach that you can do to start seeing who those journalists might be, right? So I'm going to January, maybe December 30, maybe to January 31, right? So the game was released 15 days after my initial range, my beginning, the from field, and 15 days before, I'm sorry, I kind of got lost, and 15 days before the to field, right? So when I filter this way, I'm seeing only a fraction of the results that will appear on Google, you can see. And what you're looking at here is basically, news about the game, because that's, you're not getting forums yet, you're just seeing basically the announcement, right? So here you can see in Nintendo, there's like the sales page, and you can try and find some pages that are about this game, right? I think because I'm in Brazil, it's prioritizing to show me websites in Portuguese. So let's go with this one, for example. We will open like the review. Oh, it's actually in Portuguese as well, right? But what you want to do is say, okay, this guy is actually, you want to come here and see that this guy actually wrote an article about Celeste, and if you can come here and try and find who wrote that article. So this guy over here. So you can probably click on him and see if you can find his contact information somewhere. I will not like lose your time doing this like in real time, but what I want to convey here is that you can basically open every little tab here and make sure that you are only looking at the ones that are news and people who wrote about that game that is similar to yours. I'm assuming that you are making a game like Celeste, by the way, right? I'm kind of confused about in this part of the explanation. But assuming that you are making a game like that, you can come here and find all the journalists and open one by one and start creating a spreadsheet with all this contact information, right? Because if your game is kind of like Celeste, if you defined that when you were thinking in terms of who your audience might be and which games they might have played, you want to know who are the journalists that tend to talk about a game like that, right? Because if you send your email, your press kit, your press release to those folks, they are way more likely than if you're just randomly browsing like 4-5 different websites, So try to create a list of 100 names, and I'm not kidding, like 100 names, 200 names, and then when it's time to actually promote your game, it's legwork. You are probably going to spend 1 day or 2 full days of your life just digging for the contact information of people who wrote about games that are similar to yours, right? And you are creating basically your press list when you do that. And then you talk to them, you send your email, you send your press kits, and that's basically what you do. And this is where the 5:30 close rule, which is one of the final tips that I will give, fits in. It's how to structure your messaging. You have 5 seconds to convince someone to give you 30 seconds of their time, right? So you need to open with something that is powerful, right? So Ridiculous Fishing is a game about fishing with a shotgun. That was about 5 seconds. So I'm opening my speech with that. So for example, if I'm sending an email, that might as well be my email title, right? So the journalist is going through that, and then there are several emails with boring names, and then there's one saying Ridiculous Fishing is a game about fishing with a shotgun. I would consider clicking on that. If I was trying to reach out to a publisher or to an influencer, a YouTuber, or any person really, I would try and find the best possible angle and open with that, right? So we have 5 seconds to convince people to even listen to your next 30 seconds of explanation. Then you have 30 seconds to convince them to give you 2 minutes, more or less. What does that mean? So for a different example, what is this? Evil democracy? I don't know. So I'll click on this thing and see what this is. So the name of the game and the capsule art is the 5 part of the 5:30 close sequence, right? The name of the game and the capsule art made me get into here and give 30 seconds to this game. Now this trader has about maybe 25-30 seconds, maybe even less, to convince me to keep watching. So if I'm someone who's interested in stuff like war, for example, I would probably be hooked enough to keep watching this thing, right? And let's assume that those first 30 seconds were interesting enough. Then you have the rest of the time to close the deal. So going with this example, you basically have until the end of your trailer to convince me to buy the game, right? By then, I have already, I already have a good idea if this game is for me or not. But at the very least, you got me to know that your game exists among every other game that's out there, and even made me watch your trailer, right? And that's all because you understand what your game surface is, you understand what is the most powerful aspects of your surface, and you are deliberately leveraging on that part of your game to structure your messaging, right? So you are starting with something that's very baity, very powerful, that will get me reading more. Then you are using that time that you managed to get those 30 seconds to convince me to watch to the end, right? So you both will talk a little bit about what the game is, you give some extra information, and when people have already like decided, okay, let me listen to the end for this other 2 minutes, they will give you this, you have the opportunity to close the deal, right? So you can keep talking, you can keep showing the trailer, whatever it is, right? So one example, and you should be doing this always. So I always start my lectures, talking about what is the superpower that you have and how I'm structuring, how I'm going to teach that. And I'm promising you stuff because this is really important things that you need to know. And I know most people don't want to be 2 hours, 3 hours listening to some lecture, right? But this is super, super important. So I need to earn your time, right? And if you're watching this part, you're probably watching the whole lecture, right? So this worked. And I need to earn your time. I need to tell you why this is important. Or if you are talking to a journalist, you need to tell them quickly why they should read your email and open your press kit and watch your trailer, right? So you need to earn people's time to keep talking, and you are always like earning to talk more, and objectively driving them to some sort of action that you want, right? Which is the close part of it, right? It's closing the deal. So you are actually convincing a journalist to actually write about your game, or you're convincing a YouTuber to actually play your game to their audience, right? But you're basically driving them to close the deal and do what you need them to do, right? In my case, I don't need you to do anything. I just need you to watch to the end so that you can learn all this stuff, all right? But this is the 5:30 close rule. So some final thoughts. You understand now that most game developers, they are basically doing promotion instead of doing marketing. They are only getting, without understanding what fits where, they're trying to promote random aspects of their games too early, without having a powerful hook, without having a powerful angle. Sometimes they have something really like a glass ceiling in terms of the game really looking unpolished, or giving tips that it's not super high quality or not super appropriate to that audience because it has anti-magnets. So it has some problem like that, and so they are promoting and it doesn't work, right? And instead of working on the game and getting the game finished, or actually polishing the game so that it is more attractive, they are wasting their time and they are not getting any significant results, right? So this is why most people actually fail with their promotion. So I explained to you the sequence of how you start with a powerful message. You start by designing and embedding those qualities into your actual products, and then how you transform that into a powerful marketing speech, and then how you efficiently promote that. Of course, once again, there's a limited time that you can be here, so I didn't get into a whole lot of details in each and every step. But if you want, you can always hit me up on Instagram and let me know which aspects you would like to know a little bit more in detail, and I can prepare a more specialized lecture in the future, right? And finally, I gave you some very specific tips on how to do all of those things, right? So how to embed some powerful traits in your game, how to leverage on that to create a powerful marketing speech, how to, a little bit on how you can start getting a press list and then structuring your message in a powerful way and then sending to create the outreach so that it can convert to sales, right? And with that, this lecture has been like this huge dump of information, this huge tutorial on all the different aspects that are relevant for game developers to structure their marketing in a powerful way, so that you know that when you are at the beginning, you should be caring about your surface. When you are at the end, you should be caring about creating a marketing material that's powerful based on that surface and then promoting that, right? Now, hopefully in several of the future lectures, I might be referring back to this one because this is the foundational one, and I'll teach in more details maybe how to build that press list. I'll actually demonstrate with a spreadsheet. I will show how you can do that, analyze some more sales pages so that you can see how to structure yours. We can get into details about, anti-magnets. I have already talked a lot about them, but maybe some of the attention magnets that you can use to leverage and make your surface more powerful, more attractive. And of course, for FGGS students, this is also an encouragement for you to, if it has been a while since you have gone through the training, encourage you to go back and watch it again, right? Because now you might be in a point in your development where this will be more important and you need to be doing some things in your game to, to take advantage of that. All right. So if this has been useful to you, I want you to please consider the possibility of liking this video, of sharing this video with other people who might take benefit from it. And if you haven't yet, of course, as always, go here to proindev.com/guide, and you can follow on social media so that we can keep chatting. You can ask me questions by following me on Instagram and sending me a direct message, or responding to a story where I ask people to basically ask me questions, and follow by email so that you don't miss any of the future lectures. All right. So this has been one hell, man. We crushed it. We crushed it. I don't think there's any content on the entire YouTube that will get into so many details about this. I don't know. This is possibly the biggest information dump available on the internet for professional indie game marketing. Hopefully we have achieved something here. So I'm super happy that you are listening to this part of this video, because that means you are a warrior, or at the very least a learner, right? If you get all this and learn this stuff and apply this, then you are a warrior, and you will, I'm sure, if you apply this stuff, you will have better results than you're having right now, right? And if you're just starting out, it's good that you know these things from the very beginning, because this will shape your learning path as well. So I really appreciate the audience. Thank you very much for being here, and I see you on Instagram. Take care.